We're well and truly into the Christmas season now, and that means a lot of things, but best of all in my eyes is that it's time to start watching Christmas shows and films. There is of course a wealth of older films that I do have the desire to rewatch, the Home Alones of the world, films that make Christmas feel like Christmas and just make you feel all warm and fuzzy. Not only that though, we always have a bunch of new stuff to take a look at every year to see if we can earn a place in the Christmas rotation. Only so many nights in December after all, so much content, so little time. Just recently though, we saw the release of a freshly animated Christmas film on Netflix called That Christmas. Usually when I see these sorts of things appear in my recommends, I do automatically assume that it's going to be rather bad. I don't even think that it's a fair assumption, as I've watched many Netflix animated films that I really enjoy. I think I just have it in my head that if it's not made by one of the big studios, good chance it'll be bad. That being said though, I do watch them all the same, probably because somewhere in the back of my mind I remember how much I enjoy them. Now this is one of those films that a bunch of different studios claim. Netflix Animation, Locksmith Animation, but it seems the actual animation is done by Double Negative Animation. And I've recently discovered that this seems to be a trend. You have the big overarching company that I presume funds the concept and provides the platform, maybe they choose the directors, maybe not. Then you have the company that develops the creative side of things. Then you have the company that's paid to do the animating. Why is it done like this these days? Is it cheaper to just outsource that sort of thing? Or is it so they can pass along the buck for poor working conditions for the animators? No idea, but it's odd. Regardless, we're not here to talk about that. I want to talk about That Christmas. So it was released on Netflix on the 4th of December, and the response has been somewhat mixed so far. On Rotten Tomatoes, it was not liked by critics. It has a 57% score, which is rather low, all things considered. On the face of it, the movie's bad, and there's no point in watching it, right? There's so much content on Netflix. You'll find something else, I'm certain. But then if you look a little bit deeper, you start to see a different story unfolding. The audience score is sitting on 83% as of writing this. Much more positive. So what's a man to think? How am I meant to decide whether it's good or bad without someone telling me? Well, I suppose that I'd better watch the film and advise you, shouldn't I? Surprise, surprise, but once again the professional reviewers seem to prove themselves out of touch with the common man. I know, big shocker. Who could have seen something like that coming? Because I really liked this film. I thought it was a lot of fun and delivered on what you'd expect. It's obviously not the type of film that you'd see made by the likes of Pixar. It isn't necessarily one of those big ticket movies that dives deeper into the human condition or really makes you think deeply about the world. It's a happy Christmas film that leaves you with a warm and wholesome feeling inside. The type of film that brings you cheer and gives you this nice feeling of peace and even a bit of nostalgia to tell you the truth. So when you watch it, you need to go in with that type of idea in mind. Not every film has to have these deep arcs. Sometimes things are there to be popcorn films or simple mindless fun for everybody. It's the same deal with people who hate on the Minions or whatever and call it a film for the lowest common denominator. Yeah, it might not be the same as what other studios are making. It might never gather that same art house prestige. But for what it is, it does its job and is successful because of that fact. It delivers on audience expectations. I seriously think that people need to learn to judge things by different metrics and not get bogged down in the concept of what a film is supposed to be like. You need to go with the flow and understand what you're getting yourself into. You wouldn't go into an action flick and expect an especially deep plot. It might be nice to get one, but it's not part of the social contract of audience and creator. That's my view on animation. Sometimes you can tell that things are not made for any other reason than to make you laugh or make you smile, to be a fun family experience. I reckon if shit like Home Alone was released today, it would get ragged on by the very same reviewers that call it a beloved Christmas movie today. More and more, I feel like there's an overwhelming embargo in this day and age against fun. But yes, I think this is one movie that deserves a lot better than it got, at least from a critical perspective, because I think it does everything right. When you're looking at an animated film, there are three major overarching categories that can determine the quality of your movie: visuals, music, narrative. Pretty broad categories. But everything that goes into making a good film can largely be stuffed into one of these. We'll start with animation. I'm not going to sit here and say that these are Pixar level graphics. They're not. It's a made-for-streaming film that likely had a much lesser budget than the big-ticket items from the major studios, and that is perfectly fine. It doesn't look bad or anything of the sort. The quality of the animation is not poor by any means. It's just clearly a step below, if you get me. That being said, it still has this nice quality about it. I think it's very reminiscent of something like Arthur Christmas. I don't really know why, but simply looking at the animation of the characters and what their faces look like, not even taking into account the world design of the scenery, it's almost like you can tell it's British. And I like that feeling. As if it's conforming to this rare style of character animation that's not often seen on screens anymore. It's hard to describe what I mean, but it felt right to say. But yeah, not hitting those hyper-realistic heights of Pixar with the crazy strands of hair and the glistening reflections in the eyes of the characters, that's okay, because it still looks good anyway. And regardless, whilst they're not hitting those highs, what they did get right is the design choices that were made. The little details of the setting that made the world feel more alive. The subtle clutter, the building design, the world design. Just the finer things that enhance the immersion into the world and story. Things that help to define the setting and draw in the audience. Compare and contrast that to something like Spellbound, which also came out on Netflix recently. In that film, it was clear there was a lot of time and money put into making the animation look good. As in, the quality of the animation. Fluid, highly refined. But the actual setting was bland and derivative. The most generic fantasy world ever. And so in that way, it feels like a waste of all that money. Because they spent all of that only to have this bland blueprint to build off. Here, it feels like the visuals maximize the budget, which is all you can ask for. So we move on from visuals to audio. No singing in this one, which is for the best. Sometimes it will enhance your movie, but this is a more character-based story more than anything else. And having a song would have eaten up too much time for no real gain. So we just have a nice little score which does its job in terms of the story, but never ascends to becoming something more memorable. However, there was a song by Ed Sheeran in the midst of the movie which I really did like. But like I said, that's really the one high point. Otherwise, it's a pretty generic sort of soundtrack overall. Nothing that ever detracts from the movie though. However, music is not the only component of sound that really makes a movie. For an animated film, we also have to talk about the quality of the voice acting. I have to say, I do think the voice acting for this movie is really good. You go on Wikipedia, and it's a couple of decently big names. Nobody really huge, maybe Brian Cox, but it's also a bunch of no-namers with no wiki page. In other words, rookies. Sink or swim. And this movie and the cast truly swim. Not a single dud performance across the entire cast. And what I really liked was the rich variety of voices that you hear. Different accents and ways of speaking. Generally, films will only feature really generic accents. In the case of British people, it'll probably be some sort of London accent, or if the character's upper crust, particularly posh. If it's an American character, it's just going to be that generic American accent. You're not going to typically get a full film filled with New Yorker or Southern accents, are you? They're special use accents. But this film features accents of people that don't typically appear in films that appeal to a wider audience. And unlike in a lot of other movies, it's not being done for some effect. It's not a particular character that's part of their personality and story. They're just regular people living in a little English town. And that's how they sound. I don't know, it's not something you normally see or hear. And I really appreciated that. So with the visuals and audio out of the way, the next category is the story. Spoilers ahead for the film, so be warned. That Christmas begins following Santa arriving on Christmas Eve in the small town of Wellington-on-Sea. And we have an ominous warning about the townspeople suffering from some various different personal problems, with Santa vowing that he's going to see what he can do about it. We flash back a few days previous to the local school's nativity play, where we're introduced to pretty much every single character that's relevant to the story. This story is not unlike Love Actually, where you follow maybe 3 storylines, but they're all sort of interconnected, and it's about their journeys at Christmas time. The main character is a boy named Danny Williams, who's recently moved to the town and is kind of bullied by the other children. His parents have split up, and he's anticipating the arrival of his dad for Christmas. He has a crush on a girl by the name of Sam, who has a twin sister Charlie that causes immense trouble and makes her sister sick with worry. The play's director is a teen or young adult by the name of Bernie, who's keen to prove herself and reinvent the wheel on basically everything to do with Christmas. And they're all overwatched by the fearsome Miss Trapper, who views everybody as completely inept. The play unfolds into chaos as Danny's disappointed his dad didn't show up, he gets distracted by staring at Sam, and Charlie, who plays Joseph, steps on Mary's dress and causes a watermelon to drop and roll across the stage. There's many rewrites to the original nativity story, the kind that rivals Love Actually's Octopus and the Spider-Man King. Also, I have to mention this because it was the first thing that came to mind and it was just so hilariously dark. There's this moment where Mary sings about how she's keeping my baby, and then another kid who plays the star flies and bumps into Watermelon Jesus, which slips from Mary's hands and smashes onto the floor, blasting the audience with the red goo. Baby Jesus is no more. And with the context of everything, I couldn't help but feel like this was a very dark joke. Hilarious, but dark, had to be said. Anyway, the play ends and we get more of an in-depth look at the issues facing each of the characters. Danny's mother's a nurse and overworked, but she touchingly leaves post-it notes around the house to make it seem like she's still talking to him and cares about him. In turn, Danny's a pretty thoughtful kid, preparing a toasty and tea for his mum before work. It seems his dad is a bit of a sore point in the family, and he's still holding out hope for him to come. But his mum doesn't exactly seem to be the best at handling the situation, but I suppose that is realistic. Sad but true. Meanwhile, Bernie gets little support from her family and other adults about her play, which isn't great, and you can see it's playing on her confidence. We also see that Sam's seriously worrying about Charlie's behaviour as she makes a poster threatening Santa to give her presents or else. There's a snow day where school's called off, and I have to ask, is it normal for kids to go to school so close to Christmas in the UK? In Australia, our school year ends maybe a week before Christmas, and kids don't go back until the end of January. I assume it's just for the plot, but that would suck. Due to Danny's mum being overworked, she doesn't receive the notice about Danny not having to go to school because of the snow day, and so unfortunately for him, he heads off and is spotted by Miss Trapper, who guilts him into staying because he has poor performance at school. He's pretty disengaged throughout the day until when he's on break, where Miss Trapper teaches him how to make a snowman, but in the context of education. They continue the day this way, making a wife for the snowman and an igloo for them to live in together. We then get a forlorn looking Miss Trapper and some commentary on how Christmas amplifies the joy or sorrow you feel in your life at that point in time. Meanwhile, we see Charlie and Sam enjoying their day off, with Charlie pulling a prank on their neighbour and being scolded for it by their parents. Sam spies that Charlie ticks off her plan to prank their neighbour with a drawing of her as an accomplice, and this sends her down an anxious spiral. Then it's back to Bernie's family, who also lives close by to two other families at what seems to be a conglomerate barn sort of complex. All the parents put her in charge of looking after all the other kids, whilst getting things ready for Christmas Day, because the parents are all heading off to some wedding on Christmas Eve. I have to ask, who the hell gets married on Christmas Eve? Who would turn up to this wedding? I realise not everybody celebrates Christmas, but come on. They're living in Europe. That's a haven of Christmas tradition. Even if you don't celebrate it, it's clear that a lot of your friends would. Also, making a kid you have shaky faith in responsible for looking after 4 kids, including a toddler, whilst making them do endless chores, that's seriously hard work. Grown-ass parents would curl up into a ball and cry at this task. And you're making this teen/young adult do all this on her own? Wild. Seems like they wanted to fail just to make themselves look right about her. Anyway, we come to Christmas Eve. The parents leave Bernie's storyline. Sam's family decide they need to get a turkey from the dodgy farmer that Sam hates because he's known to be cruel to animals. Charlie then concocts a plan to set the turkeys free, and succeeds, but Sam's now completely convinced that Santa's not going to give her anything because she's been so naughty and it could affect her too. Back at Danny's house, his mum sets up a trifle for him and tells him to stop by the local store to pick up some wine gums for his dad, also being a total wingman as his crush's family runs the shop. He sets off only for the shop to close, but for him to be invited in, but he declines because he has to get back to see his dad. Sadly, Dad doesn't turn up and now he's all alone on Christmas Eve. Bernie's family gets stuck on a frozen lake in the middle of a blizzard and can't make their way back home, so Bernie enlists the kids to hand make their own stockings and they all sleep together in the lounge room. Sam runs around her and Charlie's bedroom late at night, tidying up and adding a pretty please for Santa on Charlie's bedside in the hopes to make up for all her naughty decisions. At the same time, Danny's mum arrives back home to see Danny completely disappointed that his dad didn't turn up. Pretty sad state of affairs, really. So we start back up where the film actually began, where Santa does his best to make up for Danny's dad, whilst intending to punish Charlie for not being good by leaving an empty sack, and leaves creative gifts for all the kids with Bernie to make a magical Christmas. Charlie wakes up in the middle of the night and discovers she's been left a full stocking and a guitar, only to realise that Santa's mistaken her for Sam. So she puts the stocking and guitar on Sam's bed and goes back to sleep. Santa gets an alert and goes back to reward Charlie for her good behaviour. In the morning we see that Danny got a quad bike, Charlie wakes up and realises she's been put back on the nice list, and Bernie's crew decides to make their own fun Christmas without all the boring family traditions. Things take a turn, however, when Danny's mum gets called back into work, and Danny lashes out because of it. He then thinks to share a Christmas with Miss Trapper, who lives across the road, who initially rejects his idea, but later goes to get Danny's help as the parents who are stuck out on the frozen lake reach out to her to help rescue them. Once that's all sorted, she helps Danny come up with a plan to make a special Christmas evening with his mum. This all goes down a treat, and we see that Miss Trapper was actually mourning her partner, who seems to have passed away in the military at some point. Back at Bernie's house, the toddler Evie decides that she wants to take part in at least one family tradition and go to the beach boxes for the ultimate hiding spot in their game of hide and seek. Terrible timing, as the parents soon arrive and think that Bernie's done a great job, until Evie's nowhere to be found. In a blizzard! Yikes. A search goes out through the entire town, and Miss Trapper enlists Danny's help on his quad bike in forming a search party near Evie's house. Whilst Charlie and Sam are searching, Charlie gets a little bit enthusiastic and attempts to encourage Evie to find her through bribes of sweets and ice cream. This is taken as a joke by her parents until Sam steps up and defends her, having realised that every prank and joke that Charlie's pulled is for the benefit of her sister. Things like making a fool out of the girl who was bullying her, punishing the owner of a dog that Sam likes because she's cruel to said dog, releasing the turkeys from the horrible farmer who mistreats them and bullied their dad in school. Her trickery and naughtiness come from a place of love. Charlie in turn's grateful for her support and joins Sam and Danny in the search for Evie on his quad bike. They go to the local lighthouse and use that to help search across the local beach, where they finally find her huddling in one of the boxes amongst all the freed turkeys. Everything ends well and they all go for a Boxing Day swim in the freezing ocean together. Couldn't be me. Overall, it's a very sweet film. It surprisingly touches on serious topics like how Christmas can be a happy or sad time depending on other circumstances in your life, and how not everybody gets a joyous Christmas. There's also this really beautiful statement from Santa as well that no matter how much his presence can momentarily lift spirits, that life still happens and he can't solve all the problems in the world. All of this is what people really talk about when the true meaning of Christmas is the love and the family you have around you. But it's put into context really well in a kids' film. The problems these characters face as well, in my opinion, are incredibly relatable ones. Danny struggles after moving to a new town. His grades are bad, most likely because of a poor home life. His mum's doing her best, but she doesn't make all the right choices, like criticizing his dad in front of him. Plus, there's the old lady in palliative care, Danny's feeling neglected, there's Charlie with her heart really in the right place, but also rightly facing the consequences of her actions. Sam's most likely anxious, and doing everything right to overcompensate for her sister. Bernie rises to the task of looking after everyone really well, but when the adults arrive, everything falls apart, and her mistake is all she feels is memorable. There's the teacher who comes across as stern and judgmental, but actually cares a lot for others and holds everything together when shit hits the fan. There's just so much to love about the movie. The characters feel so real, the issues feel real. And it's not a Christmas story when it's either overly jovial or overly depressing. It's best when it accurately reflects people's experiences, and there's something so unique about that that makes it great. Richard Curtis is truly a masterclass in that type of writing, and he's done it again. I really did love the joke about Love Actually, especially as for me, this feels like a kid's version of that film. There's just a lot to enjoy, a lot to love, and I can't recommend it enough. With all of that being said though, these have all been my opinions, and I'd like to hear yours. What did you think of that Christmas? Did you like it? Hate it? Have you seen it yet? Have I convinced you to give it a try? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.